Hello and welcome. In today's video, I will be teaching you how to tie a tie. Lift my collar here, get situated. Now, it is very quick and easy to tie a tie and show you how to do so. And just go across, behind, wrap around in front, up through the loop, and back down through that loop. We'll pull to tighten. We can do a little pinch to get a dimple. And there we have tied our tie. Bring my collar back down. Just make sure we're cleaned up there. And we are ready to go. So, of course, I did that very quickly. It is fairly simple, but we're going to go nice and slowly through how to tie a tie. We're going to take our time. We'll look at some different styles of knots. And it is mostly a matter of preference which knot you use, but talk a little bit about why you might choose one versus the other, as well as a little bit about how ties are made and some of the differences you'll encounter that might affect what knot you tie. And then as a bonus, I will teach you how to tie a bow tie, which I find to be just a little bit more challenging. But with all that said, let us get started. If you already know how, you can sit back and enjoy, maybe see some different types of knots. And if you don't know how, I will take you through the basics. All right, let's start with our first knot, which will be the Windsor Knot. All right, the Windsor Knot. Now, this is the first knot that I learned how to tie. It's pretty classic. It has traditional vibes to it. I don't know which of these is actually like the oldest knot, but generally the Windsor is pretty formal and traditional. Pretty much everyone I know, and I think the world basically at this point, uses the 4 in hand, which is a simple knot we'll look at in just a bit. But it'd be good to start with a very classic knot in the Windsor. So I have the top button of my collar buttoned, and when I go to tie a tie, I have always broken the collar to bring it up so we can wrap the tie around this area. Now, there are people who say that's not the best for the shirt, which I could see maybe continually folding that up and down. And so alternatively, you can kind of tuck and just slide it to get it in there. I've basically never been able to do that and accidentally just succeeded in this video. So that is a matter of preference, how you want to do it. I like having my collar up. That's what I'm familiar with. I'm going to bring that up. That helps me make sure I'm all situated. If you do it with the collar down, of course, you can start from a place where you've made sure the collar is covering the back of the tie. So the Windsor Knot. I'm using a tie here that is fairly thin and long because there's going to be a lot of wraps of the fabric when making this knot. So it doesn't work with all ties depending on the length of tie, the size of your neck, how long your torso is. things like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And for this knot, so we have the blade of the tie here, this thick side. I'm going to have it in my right side with my right hand, and then this thinner blade will be on my left side. And we'll try to offer up a mirrored version of these as well, if you want to have kind of same side hand visible for those of you who are right-handed. So with the Windsor, I'm going to have the smaller end fairly short to tie this knot, because we are going to go through a lot of fabric here. Alright, so what I'm going to do for the Windsor, I just come across the shorter end, and then I come up through the loop that I've created, pull that back down, then we come behind, and this time we're going to come up in the front and back down through this neck loop, pulling that down, and you'll see we've created a triangular shape. This is a very symmetrical knot, if that is a look that you're going for. And then we just bring this back across the front to make a loop that we're going to go down through, back up through the neck hole, and then we're going to bring the blade back down through that loop that we've created, and we pull the larger blade to tighten the knot. I'm going to put my index finger here at the base of the knot and pinch. This helps form a dimple. So we pull down. I'm not always the most perfect dimple maker, so let's see what we can do, and we can clean up the knot a little bit. And then I can pull this tight up to the collar. Just clean that dimple up a bit. There we go. Adjust it so we get in position. And that is our Windsor knot. I'm going to pull my collar down. And that is how you tie the Windsor knot. You'll see, because there's those multiple turns of the fabric, it's a fairly bulky knot, so I went with a thin tie fabric. This is silk. Most all of the ties we'll be looking at are silk, but we'll talk about wool as well. And so it forms a symmetrical knot, but it can be a very big knot depending on your tie. If you don't have the lengths exactly where you need them, you can end up with this thick part of the tie forming the knot, which is not really what you want. So the goal when we tie our tie, since I have the camera up here on the knot, I will use this belt to show you. We basically want to have the tip of the tie land somewhere inside the belt area, generally kind of just touching the top, but kind of anywhere in that belt area is the desired length. We also have a loop on the back of the tie where we can tuck the end once we've completed the knot. And what you'll see here is that my first attempt at tying this, we don't quite reach. The length on the blade is pretty good, but maybe a touch long. And so this is just a matter of getting the length of the short versus the long end, and where you tie the knot situated exactly where you need them. Pull that out, and the Windsor is a knot that, if you just pull it, comes out. So I'm going to tie that one more time, and I'll try to get that length dialed in just a little bit more where we want it. And I'm also going to camera flip this. You'll have a mirrored version. Again, get our tie around here, Start with just a little bit longer short end this time. And I'm going to come across the short end over to what would be my left hand side. Come up through the neck loop. Pull that back down for our first loop. Come behind with the large end. That comes up and down through the neck loop. So we have our triangle here. We bring this across horizontally. And then we tuck behind, come back up through the neck loop. And then we go down through that loop we have in front. Pull to tighten on the large blade. A little pinch here as we pull. And then I can hold on to the short end and slide the knot up. They're effectively all slip knots. Alright, there we go. That is our Windsor knot. Just get that tied up to my neck. Bring the collar down. I want to make sure the tie isn't sticking out from underneath. Again, a very symmetrical knot. And of course, the way I tied that, I ended up with almost exactly the same length as before. Now, with a tie pin or a tie tack, you can kind of get away with that if you don't get it tied exactly the way you want and don't want to redo it, or the length of the large blade is where you need it. But if you're not getting the right mix of lengths, that might just be due to the length of your tie and your body. If you're a little bit taller or have a larger neck. So let's look at some other knots that use a little bit less of that fabric. And we'll start with the half Windsor. Start with a little bit longer blade on the short end. Cross and up, back under, up, back down through. Bring it across the front, up through the neck, get a hold of it to bring it back down through the loop, and there we go. Bring this up here, bring my collar down, pull it, bring the knot up tight, and this time you see we have enough to get the blade in the rear through our loop. We have a nice strong knot here at the top. And this is just a hair above the top of my belt. So you can see it takes a little bit of practice just to dial in the lengths that you're going to use. If you're doing it all the time, it'll be second nature. I don't tie the Windsor very often, and so it's taken me a couple tries here to get the exact length that we want. So that's pretty normal until you're a hardcore tie-tying professional. So it is a balance of length, your neck size, how much fabric is in your tie, how tall, how long your torso is. All these factors can affect how the knot and the tie turn out. So let's look at some knots that use a little less fabric in their creation. And we'll start with the half Windsor. Okay. Much like it sounds, the half Windsor is quite literally half of a Windsor knot. So what we're going to do is we come across, just like we started the Windsor. We go behind, back up through to form that loop. So exactly the same start as the full Windsor. And this time we come behind and we simply wrap around horizontally. We don't do the second loop. Bring this up through the neck and then back down through that fabric we've brought across the front. And then we just pull down to tighten. We can slide our knot up to our collar here. Tuck. And bring the collar down. Adjust our knot here until we're happy. Okay. So what we end up with is a bit of a smaller knot than we had before. It's not as symmetrical as the full Windsor, but it still looks pretty sharp. And you can see that, look at the length of the points of the collar and how much the tie takes up here with the knot. Now, a guideline is that you want your knot maybe take a third of the collar. Of course, this depends on your specific style, the tie that you're wearing, your preferences. Tie width is a pretty trendy thing. So there's a lot of things that can dictate this, but it's another way to look at it is you probably just don't want your knot occupying this whole area. You want some of that collar to be free of the knot. So, but if you're tying a 4 in hand, kind of the most common knot, you're generally going to be in a good place. This is pretty similar. It's not too large, but not super small either. See, we have the nice dimple here. It's not required that you have a dimple. Some people tie it without it. Fabric smooth across the front here. It's a matter of preference, but most common to aim for the dimple. And again, we're aiming for the point here to fall at the belt line. And that is our half Windsor knot. Now let me tie it again, and we will mirror the camera so you can see that mirrored view. So go around the collar, and with the Windsor and the half Windsor, the front of the tie will be facing out when you start your knot. That's an important detail. So start with the front here, and then we will come across with the large end. Come up behind, up through the neck to make our first loop. We bring that behind and then horizontally across the front. Bring the large end up through the neck hole and back down through that loop we just made. Pull our fabric down. We can use our index finger and pinch to help form that dimple as we pull down. And hold on to the short end, slide the knot up to our collar. That's situated where we want to. Bring the collar back down. Straighten things up. Hold it tight. You know, if you're going to unbutton your collar and have your tie loose, that's like end of the night, I'm going casual, but you do want it tight against the collar if you're wearing it. we pull it to have it up against the collar. We've tucked our end into the loop, and we have a very nice blade length here sitting right at the top of my belt. So that is the half Windsor knot. Now we're going to look at what I believe is the most popular knot. I think it's what most people learn to tie these days, and what you're going to see most of the time, at least outside of more traditional or formal settings. So let's have a look at the 4-in-hand knot. Alright, I've grabbed a different tie. I have this blue striped tie. And just like this gold tie, it is also made of silk, but it's a bit thicker. Don't know how well you'll see that, but this is a fairly thin material. This is a bit thicker. And let's just compare their lengths. The blue one is slightly longer. And I'm going to use it to demonstrate the 4-in-hand. Obviously we could tie it with that tie. Be a wonderful choice. But because this is a little bit thicker, while you could tie the Windsor knot, you can end up with a much bulkier knot. A bulkier knot than I would want. And so it's a better candidate for something like the 4-in-hand. Now, the 4-in-hand is a very simple knot to tie. And all we're going to do, right, I have the long blade with my right hand, I have the shorter end in my left hand, and I have a bit more length this time with the shorter end, because we're using less fabric to make the knot, so we want to make sure that this end will be long enough and balanced with the other side. So I just bring the large end across, bring it around behind, bring it across the front to form our loop, come up through the neck, and then I pull this large blade down through that loop on the front, and then we just pull to tighten. Same thing again, I'm holding on to the short end to slide the knot up to my collar. Make sure we're situated here. My collar. Make sure the tie is not sticking out anywhere. Okay, and then, so this, the way it's come out, kind of doesn't really have a dimple, which is perfectly acceptable if that's the look you're going for. You can also kind of pinch and form that dimple as we tighten it up, if that's the look you're aiming for. Alright, again I've tucked the short end into the loop here. This is a longer tie, so this is sitting kind of right at the bottom of my belt, the way we've tied this knot. So overall this is pretty solid. You can see that it's not the most symmetrical knot compared to something like the Windsor, but this is a very, very popular way to tie a tie, and it's going to work for many situations and with many different types of ties. So let's tie it one more time so you can see it again. And as before, we are going to mirror the camera so you can match up the side if you are right-handed. Slide this off. And again, the knot just pulls right out. here. Get my tie situated. Get a good length on the smaller blade. And then we bring the large blade across. We go back behind. We bring it across the front. We're keeping this loop. So we bring it up through the neck loop and then back down through that loop on the front. And we're just gonna pull to tighten. Get the knot tight. Bring the knot up to my collar. Make sure everything looks the way I want it. Can tuck the end here. And bring my collar down. There we go. Can go a touch tighter here. Make sure it's situated where we want it. There we go, the 4 in hand. If you take away one way to tie a tie from this video, take the 4 in hand. Super, super easy to do. It's going to work with many different kinds of ties, and it's just going to suit you well in so many different situations. Now, do you have to know how to tie a tie at this point? With YouTube readily available and tutorials everywhere, well, I think it's a good skill to have. You know, you might be at a destination wedding, up on some mountain with no internet service. You don't know how to tie your tie. It's going to be an embarrassment to the family. You'll be ostracized, kicked out of the tribe, and, end up dying alone in the wilderness. So, basic life skill that really could save you. Well, maybe that's an exaggeration, but useful skill to know. 4 in hand, great for every day. If you need a very formal look, you might go with that Windsor. We're going to look at a couple knot variants, but before we do, I just want to dive in a little bit more about why you might choose one knot versus another. So I mentioned how the knot fits within the collar. And that's very important. You want a nice aesthetic look, and it's to your taste. This shirt has somewhat of a spread collar, but not super wide. But let's look at a different example. If we look at this shirt, you can see the collar has a very wide spread to it. Now, a lot of people really like this style. I actually prefer more traditional, kind of closer look, but I have shirts of both styles, obviously. And with this more spread collar, you might want a different shape or size of knot. Probably gonna go with the 4 in hand here. Just because this is so wide, if you fill the whole thing with a huge knot, that might look weird, but if you find your knot is too small relative to how much real estate you have here, you might want something with a little more width to it. So just think about how you're balancing the knot that you choose with the shirt that you wear. If you have a much longer collar point, and maybe that's a little bit older style shirt, it might end up with a much narrower gap here on the collar, and you might want more of a thin knot so you don't have the knot pushing up on the collar, or you don't see it at all. So that can be something that determines what knot you're tying. And then we already discussed the thickness of the tie, right? This was very thin. This was a little bit thicker. And then I have this wool tie, which again is a bit thicker material. It's also not super long, so something like this is not going to work with a Windsor. The knot would be way too large because of the tie thickness. It's going to end up way too short, And wool tie, usually not a formal choice. Still can be very elegant, but more wintry or less formal than like a nice silk tie. So it's definitely a choice, but probably not going to work with the Windsor, and the 4-in-hand is going to be what you're looking for. I also have this tie, which is a super skinny tie. And like I mentioned, the width of tie is often very much a fashion trend. You know, the 70s had these like gigantic ties. You had like really retro 50s or 60s, super thin. These kind of came back here and there. With this, like a big Windsor knot is just going to seem weird because the material is so thin. However, if you tie a 4-in-hand, just do one really quickly. You get a pretty small knot. And because it's such a thin tie, that's generally probably what you want, which is part of the style. But depending on the exact tie or the look you're going for, you might want a tiny bit more bulk to that knot. I have some actual vintage ties that are like even thinner than this. So yeah, they make for a very tiny knot if you tie a 4-in-hand. And since we're on the subject, kind of looking at materials and thickness, most fine ties are made from silk. Now, you do see options in wool or cashmere. Of course, you can get cheap ties that are made of, nylon, polyester, synthetic materials. But classically, good ties are made 100% silk. And they are generally made of 3 pieces of fabric. You can see where they're stitched together. They'll have a silk liner here, but inside all of this, there's generally a cotton lining. And that's what can give that tie some thickness. Why this tie is thicker than this one. Very thin, almost non-existent liner here. This having a thicker liner. So construction of your tie, a thicker liner, going to give you a bigger knot. Not going to work as well for some of the larger tie knots. Alright, so that's just a little bit of information to help you think about what knot you might tie. But again, you don't have to get too bogged down. Go with the 4-in-hand. It's likely going to cover most any scenario that you're working with. Alright, I wanted to do a quick example of a tie that just doesn't work for the Windsor. Just to kind of show that that's a situation you can run into. I actually grabbed this awesome dog tie for the video and was going to do the Windsor with it. So across, up through, behind, up, back down through, across the front, up through the neck hole, and back down through. And we pull it up here in a pretty sizable knot. And we have a couple of problems. So this is just about to my belt, but it is too short. It's close. We have a fairly big knot relative to the width of the tie. Hold the collar down so you can kind of get that sense. Okay? And then my smaller end here does not reach the loop. So I can't tuck it in. It's not going to be good. So what are we looking at here? Looking at multiple problems. This knot is too big for how I want it to look for the width of this tie. The point doesn't reach down far enough, but if I make it longer, it would make this problem even worse. Alright, so this tie is a little bit shorter than some of the other ones I looked at. And it's not like crazy thick, but it has some thickness. And then it's fairly narrow overall. So I only did this just because sometimes it's helpful to see counter examples, and maybe if you run into these problems, you'll have a better sense of what they are, but also that sometimes that's just the case. It's just your body and the tie, and there's nothing really to be done about it, except choose a different knot or a different tie if you want a specific kind of look. So, this of course will work just fine with the forehand across, behind, loop in front, up, back down through, pull our knot to tighten, slide it up, get a dimple in there if we want, snug that up. I can tuck it into its little loop here. It's coming down to my belt. And that's a better knot size for the narrowness of this tie. And that's worth mentioning one more kind of guideline. And this is more about tie selection than the knot, but just while we're on the subject. Like I said, the width of a tie is often kind of dictated by the fashion of the day, to use the modern parlance, the fashion of the day. But if you're unsure, one guideline, and again, this is just a frame of reference, it's not definitive. The width of your tie can correspond with the width of your jacket lapel. Let me grab this jacket, right? Here's the lapel. Fairly thin lapel would be perfectly fine with a narrower tie. A much wider tie isn't necessarily a disaster or anything, but you might find less harmony between the elements of a suit in that case. So that's why that kind of guideline is there. I'll just give it to you as something that you can have in the back of your mind. But there are no hard and fast rules. Obviously, do what's going to work best in a given situation. Okay, a bit of an aside there, but let's shift back into a couple other knots. What I am going to show you now are two small variations on that knot. The Victoria and the Prince Albert. We're going to do the Victoria and then the Prince Albert. They're almost identical. They start exactly like the four in hand. They just have an extra wrap at the end, and that is the only real difference. The four in hand is classic. These are a bit more of an affectation. The knot ends up looking a little bit different, and noticeably so. But they can also add just a tiny bit of bulk to a knot. So, like the four in hand, we go across, back, behind. Remember, we loop across in front And in the four in hand, we would come up through and finish. With the Victoria, we pass it behind again and go in front again. And this time, we do come up through the neck loop, and we go just through this front loop, and we're going to pull to tighten. Same as our other knots. Shift this up. Get situated here. Bring my collar back down. Again, just make sure everything is how we want it. Tuck our end here. And you see, we have what basically looks like a four in hand, but there's just a little bit more body in the knot because of that extra wrap. Okay? Now let's look at the Prince Albert, which almost identical, one very tiny difference at the end. All right. Again, we'll get set up, go across, back behind, around the front, and keep your fingers in this loop. Just like the Victoria, we're going around a second time. But this time, you see my fingers hold that loop. We come up through the neck, and then we bring the blade down through both of those loops. So a little bit higher degree of difficulty there. Gonna pull this down, tighten things up here. We want to get these loops kind of inside of each other. So we pull this down. There we go. Take some adjustment, slide it up here. Keep tightening. Bring everything up into position. Kind of just gotta guide that fabric so those loops stay wrapped around each other. Tighten up a little bit more. Get that adjusted. There we go. Now you'll see there's a little bit of that other loop peeking out, and depending on how you kind of form and fashion things and tighten it up, you might have a little bit more of that sticking out. Again, we get a little more body in the knot from the extra wrap, but it has a little bit more of that visible difference from the four in hand. So definitely would stand out a little bit if you went with this knot. So it's a matter of personal choice, aesthetics. If you want to be a little bit different, well, and get a little bit extra volume in your knot, you can go with the Prince Albert. You'll note it does not pull free like the other knots we've been tying. Alright, so let's do mirrored versions of the Victoria and the Prince Albert. I remember as a youth I would dial up the tobacconist and ask him if he had Prince Albert in a can. And when he said yes, I would say, we'll let him out. Ah, the wild things we used to get into. Cross the front of the smaller end, back behind, and then across the front, just like our four in hand. Four in hand, not four in hand. Victoria, we're going to make another wrap, and we're only going through that front loop. So back up through the neck, back down through. So it starts like the four in hand and finishes like the four in hand. Just has that one extra loop around the knot. Pull down here, tighten things up, and slide that up to our collar. Pull our collar back down. Get it snugged up here. And that is our Victoria. Like the four in hand, one extra loop, go down through the front loop. Okay? Now we'll do the mirrored version of the Prince Albert. Same setup, except we're going to go down through both loops. Pop the old collar. Prince Albert mirrored. Show you here. We go across the front, around the back with our large end. Again, remember we're going to go across the front and we're going to make another loop across the front just like that. But I need to keep my fingers in so I can go back down through both loops. There, I've switched my right hand to keep the loop. You can do whatever works best for you. I find that works for me. And I need to put this larger blade back down through both of our loops here. And we want to keep them together. See how they want to separate behind here. I'm gonna keep them in line as I pull this down. This one's a little bit trickier to kind of get all the pieces where you want them to be. Like that. Pull a little tighter. There we go. And bring it up to my collar here. Bring the collar back down. Alright, and again, get that little bit of fabric from that second loop. And that is our Prince Albert. Okay, so two variations that add a little more knot size to the four in hand and maybe have a little bit more of an affectation to them. Now, before we do the bow tie, I'm going to do one other knot. It's kind of a special case knot. It is called the simple knot. It is in fact very simple, but you might need it depending on your body size and the length of your tie. To mix things up, I'll use this red tie. And this time, we start with the back of the tie facing outward. The back is facing outward, okay? Now, the reason we might do this knot is that it uses the least amount of fabric of the tie to form the knot. We basically cut out one of our turns. So, if you're someone with a large neck, tall torso, where you need to get all of that tie length, or you just have a short tie and need a knot that'll work with that, this is what you can do. So, the large blade here on my right side, I just tuck it behind. I bring this across the front, up through the neck hole, and back down through my loop there. That's all there is to it. So it's a little bit like a four in hand, just kind of shortcutted. Tighten that up, pull this up, and you can tuck. Bring our collar back down. Make sure this is snugged up here. And there we have our simple knot. Super easy. Generally I would say use the four in hand unless you need this, where you need a little bit extra from the tie. So let's see that mirrored. Another knot that does not pull out. So get my tie ready here. This time having the back of my tie facing forward. Decently long blade length. You'll have to get it for your body, kind of like the four in hand, since we're not using too much. A little bit longer on your short side. Big side, the large blade goes behind, comes back across the front, up through our neck hole. And then we put the point down through that loop that we have made in the front. And we just tighten things up. Tuck hand here behind. Bring my collar down. And that is my simple knot. Okay, again, four in hand, most any scenario, some different options. If you want a more formal look, some more body in your tie, don't have a lot of tie to work with, you can choose some of those other knots. And then we'll finish out with the bow tie, which is a little bit trickier, but a hand-tied bow tie is really elegant and beautiful and a great touch if you're wearing a tuxedo, very formal dress. So let's look at how to tie the bow tie. Let's take a look at tying a bow tie. Now, I am not a master of this craft. I can do it, but not a professional. Of course, the easy way to do a bow tie is a pre-tied one that you can hook on. And of course is super convenient and has a really nice, crisp, put together look. A hand-tied bow tie can be a little more, a little less uniform, depending on your skill and the tie. But it's kind of a nice touch to have that more unique look. So you start with something like this, and you'll note each end has this weird shape. And what's going to happen is this gets folded over, right, and then you get that more classic looking bow tie shape. Farfalla, if you're making pasta. I've put on this tuxedo shirt, pleated front, has these little collar points. A lot of people would see this as a very classic type of shirt to wear with a tuxedo and a bow tie. Definitely tuxedo shirts that have a collar, so that works just as well. And then some people wear a bow tie with a regular suit instead of a typical tie. A bit of an affectation these days, but it is an option. So to start with, let's get this around our neck. We want the front of the fabric here is going to be facing out. All right. And they're going to be of unequal length. I'm going to tie just bringing what's going to be the longer end over the other end and tie a very basic overhand knot there by bringing it through and back up. All right. I did a knot video many years ago on the channel. I should redo that. And then what we're going to do, so I'm going to make it so this shorter end kind of is just coming out of that knot, and I'm going to pull tighter with this longer end. And then it needs to just kind of be out of our way for a second. Alright, so what we're going to do, if you take it in this hand, the end point, and just loop with your index finger in this oval section to do that fold, right? However you want to do it. You can do it more one-handed, of course, but the index finger, because we need to fold this over, right? So we start seeing the shape of that bow tie, okay? So we have this end, we need a little bit of operating length. This end we fold over, and then we bring this longer end over the front, down the middle. So you can see I have that on either side, and this is running down the middle. So we kind of want to keep things tight because you want to be tying this pretty close to the neck. There's a lot of leeway for tightening things up as we get it tied. So it's a little bit tricky. So we've brought this down over the front. I'm holding it here because if I don't hold it, it will come apart. And what you can do if you want is now then bring these two pieces together, keeping this down. And we've got to get this piece through the hole that is in the back here. Let's see if I can show you. Right, so we've brought this here, this comes down, and then back here we just have a little spot to go through, and we need to bring this, right, we have this end, and again this part has to fold, and so it's this part that's going to push through that gap that we have in the rear here. So a little bit of a squeeze. Alright, so we get that loop pulled through. Alright, so it takes a little bit of maneuvering to get it through that hole back there. And then for me it takes a fair amount of kind of wiggling to get everything situated. And I'm going to show you exactly what you're looking for here. Let me just, so I can pull on the loops. There's free ends and looped ends. If you kind of pull on the loops, that's kind of where you can get the knot tightened up. But then you want to release some of that a little bit because you need these free ends to be situated kind of symmetrically and form the overall shape of this bow tie. So a little bit of a challenge, but let's look at what we end up with to help orient you. So remember we had those two goofy shapes. We have two free ends and two parts that get folded over to make loops. So on each side I have a loop and one of those kind of triangular squared off free ends. This side I also have the free end and the loop. So on this side the loop is in front, this side the loop is in the rear. Those are kind of how I can tighten, and then have these free ends we kind of balance the knot out with. So because we want that kind of overall symmetry, there's only so much slack we can take out, so we kind of need it fairly well fitted to our neck kind of depends on how you want it to look. If you want to pull out the loops a little bit more, it just kind of has a more free look to it. And then we want to put our tips up on top. That's the classic way, not tucked behind. Alright, so that is the bow tie. A little bit more fumbly and tricky to get things in position. At least for me, there's a little bit less room to work with in tying it. So why don't we try again? Let's do a mirrored version so you can get that take on it. Okay? Pop this and we will start over again. Alright, so again we have these symmetrical ends. There's the free end and the end that's going to loop to make our little bow tie pasta. Alright, put this around the neck. And we're going to have one end longer than the other. I'm going to use my right hand piece starting as the longer element, so I take that over, go up through the neck to make a basic overhand knot, and we'll tighten that up with more length on this end that I'm going to be using to go around the bow tie. This shorter end we kind of want sort of right up against the neck, since all we're going to do is fold it over. Alright, grab the tip of this shorter end, can fold it to get my first look at the bow tie shape. Have a loop on this side, free end here, grab the tip, fold it. Now we take this end, go down the center here, keeping things tight. And I'm going to hold on to this gap in the rear because I need to loop this guy around, pushing from this way through, folding this over as I do so we get a loop coming out that side. Right? Okay. So now I have gotten it through. I have a rough form of the knot. And then now we just want to straighten things up, get the elements in position. I can pull on my loop ends to tighten things up, then straighten out those free ends. Okay, so again I've ended up with a loop here in front, and on this side a loop in the rear, and the free end in the front. This side, loop in the front, free end in the back. And so the bow tie is a combo of those looped ends and straight ends. And that is what we get. Pop my collar tips there. Right, and that is our bow tie. A little bit trickier to tie. Gotta get through that little gap in the back, get everything lined up. I like that it has kind of a very personable touch. It's not totally perfect. I like the expression of that. But that is how you tie a bow tie. Okay, well, thank you for your time. I hope you've found it helpful to learn some different ways to tie a tie. Some knots you can use in different situations, though as always, the four in hand is generally what people use. And then how to tie a bow tie. A little more challenging, but maybe a nice skill to have. And with that, I will wish you good night.